Hi, I'm Lise Wiehl, and welcome to an afternoon of Law and Crime. I'm happy to be with you, and with me here as my guest this afternoon is Mike Koribanics. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Perfect, thank you.
Excellent. The afternoon starting off just terrifically. And we're going to be following up with the trial that I know you've been watching this afternoon, Texas versus Roy Oliver, Officer Roy Oliver. But first, before we do this, let's go to top crimes, and we'll be right back after that.
A convicted felon in Kansas City was arrested for a shooting spree that left 3 people dead and 2 injured. 35-year-old Isaac Fisher reportedly killed his first victim, 34-year-old Anjanette Hollins, at her home before shooting 3 relatives at another home 30 minutes later, including a 4-year-old girl. Fisher then reportedly fatally shot his cousin before being apprehended by authorities. Fisher now faces 18 felony counts, including 3 counts of murder. A second melee in less than a week at a Bronx juvenile detention center left 16 correction officers injured. The brawl occurred at the Horizon Juvenile Center in the Bronx, which opened last week under New York State's Raise the Age law, which requires all 16 and 17-year-old inmates to be removed from prison populations in the state and placed into juvenile centers. Just days after opening, a melee ensued with officers and inmates, leaving 20 officers injured. Authorities say none of the officers' injuries were serious. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Before we go to the Oliver case in Texas, I just have to talk a minute about this. We just saw this video in Top Crimes. Look, this was 16 officers injured in this shooting, this breakup in this juvenile facility. Look at this enhanced video of this. This is the second time this has happened in just such a short occurrence. 20 people were hurt last week. What do you make of this? What's going on, and why is this happening again and again? What's going on?
I think that the difficulty here with the whole justice system when you're in the penal aspect, especially for juveniles, is the very fact, if you talk to I have older clients who do time, and they're like, stay away from the young guys because they're still trying. They're not mature yet. They're still trying to stake their claim. They're really not sure how to act. And they do their time a lot louder, as they say. A lot of the older people who have been in penitentiaries before, they want to just do their time and get it over with. This is a whole new thing with the 16-year-olds getting in there. They're coming into the juvenile facility. Now they're on top, and they're no longer the lower rung.
Right.
And I think it's a real bad situation.
Well, it's called Raise the Age laws, right? It's called Raise the Age laws here in New York, and it's where 16 and 17-year-olds are then bumped up. What used to be tried as juveniles are now bumped up under these Raise the Age laws to be tried as adults. And I get the reasoning behind it, which is that, look, you do horrible things as a 16 or 17-year-old, and you're just skating under that juvenile sentencing. And so you want to be able to, for the public, push those juvies up and push them into that adult range. I get that. But what you see then there is, if you're going to do that, if you're going to push those juvies up into that adult range, don't have them be into that kind of facility like that, right? Well,
that's the problem. A lot of these laws are knee-jerk in the sense of they think it'll get votes, but nobody thinks it through. What's the next
exactly.
step?
What are you going to do next? Where are you going to put them? What's going to happen then?
And the big problem, and a lot of studies show this with psychologists, are 16, 17-year-olds. They're finding studies now are not maturing until 24 years old.
Exactly.
And it's a very difficult thing.
Especially
and this is
with
what's
the
happening.
boys. I mean, especially with the boys, exactly. Their brains aren't completely formed, especially with the young men. And I completely agree with you that it's and as a former prosecutor, that it's a vote-getting mechanism. And they do commit these horrible crimes. So there is a reason to do it, to bump them up. But if you're going to do that, you can't put them in this facility then where they're hurting other officers. And this has happened now twice in 2 weeks. I mean, it's just so frustrating to see this.
Well, the difficulty, too, is like they do horrible crimes at that age. But if you look at the crimes, it's exactly what the psychiatrists talk about. These are crimes that are impulse control related, where a mature mind doesn't have the impulse control. So just by putting somebody in these facilities is not going to help with the reformation unless we teach these juveniles or help them mature their minds. You can't speed up that process, but that's the problem.
And they're making it worse for themselves. Now they're going to have more convictions because of what they're doing now in the facility. It's just making it worse and worse and worse. Oh, okay. Thank you so much for that analysis. And we're going to go back to Texas now, in the case that we've been following, Texas versus Oliver. So let's go back to that case, and we're going to go to another video of, in that case, and more analysis there. Let's go to the courtroom in Texas, and we'll be back for more analysis in just a few minutes. Okay, a little bit of audio problems there, so let's go straight to an analysis with the video analyst here. Wow. So we have here an analysis of the video where the officers are responding. And really what you got, I mean, if you break it down, is two officers responding to a call. And one officer saying, look, I shot and somebody ended up dead, but I was shooting to protect another officer. And that other officer saying, no.
It's not a good position to be in if you're a defendant. And, you know, here's a person, you're saying, I'm stepping in his shoes and acting accordingly within the law. And he's saying, no, my shoes were never in trouble.
Right, exactly.
And it's interesting, this witness.
And this is what this video is showing. And
it's interesting because I guess it's going to show how long I've been trying cases because, you know, 15 years ago, if they would have had a video analysis come in, you'd object to it and say the jury could look at it,
make their own determination,
about what's going on.
Perspective, and that's what we would talk about often in these cases is perspective and things like that. You know, perspectives can be different. So,
but something jumped out here that really was quite enlightening was the fact that these video analysts can really put distance as to where the equipment was and really do give a better, because sometimes the videos don't tell the whole story, but he's actually talking about going away milliseconds of when shots occurred. Very, very strong witness for the state.
Yeah, yeah. Very strong witness for the state. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens, and we will be following it very closely. And we will see right after this break. Be right back. Fascinating. Oh, another fascinating piece that we have coming up here is the daily debrief every day at 5 o'clock. In case you've missed just a moment or two, look, there we go. Our own Aaron Keller will from 5 to 5:30. You've got to tune in for that. He'll wrap up in his own imitable way the whole day. So stay tuned for that. Now we'll go to a quick brief, our own quick brief, and we'll be right back after it. Stay with us. Hi, I'm Lise Wiehl. We're here with it in Texas. Well, we're not in Texas. We're in New York, but we're going to Texas with the Roy Oliver case. But in New York, I'm joined by Mike Koribanics. Thank you so much for being here, Mike. You've
always a pleasure.
So great already, and I know it's going to be great for the rest of the afternoon. So let's travel, zoom all the way with our camera to Texas and continue with that video expert. Okay, so in cross-examination, they're trying to bring it out that the officer that the defendant is riding with, his voice is pitched, it's up, that he was fearful, that there was some reason that he had fear, therefore the shooting was justified.
Yes, but this is an expert you could tell has been around because he was reeling the defense attorney back into saying, I'm not an expert for that.
I can't get in.
I'm here. This is what I'm here for. This is what I know about. And I think when an expert does that, he builds instant credibility with the jury. Because now they're saying, you know what, he's not trying to be here like he's the star. He's just, this is what he does. He does video and audio. And I thought he did a good job when the defense counsel tried to lead him into about the I can use common sense, trying to say you don't need to be an expert.
Right.
I can hear his footsteps.
But he's here as an expert.
And he showed him why he's here as an expert, because he said, no, that's not reliable. When I break down these frames and I break down these audio, that's reliable, that's scientific.
Right. And he's not here to use common sense. He's not. Well, in fact, that's what the jury is there for. You know, the jury is there to use their common sense. They have the experts there to give them the expertise, that then the jury puts their common sense and applies it to the expertise, right?
Well, ultimately, and the judge in every jurisdiction instructs, you can accept or reject the expert.
Right.
You don't have to follow him just because he says so. And so in this point, though, this is an expert, though, you want to follow because he's really not trying to overplay his hand. He's telling you what he can do and can't do, and he's telling you where you're wrong and where he thinks he's right.
Yep. All right. Let's go back to this expert. Let's hear more of him on cross-examination. Let's see what he will and won't say to the defense attorney. So, Mike, what's he getting at here? He says he's got software that the defense attorney himself is bought into. So.
I thought I heard wrong. I can't believe he said he bought it.
No, it's true. I mean, unless we both heard wrong, that the defense attorney himself is bought into. So he's got this software. He's got 10 employees, including some people in his family, all well and good. I mean, we know this expert is truly an expert, and he's testified in many cases. And yeah, the defense attorney has even bought into the software. And this software, with 376 apparatuses, or apps to it, or devices, whatever, allows the expert to go beyond the slides, the actual slides, if I'm understanding this correctly, that they're given to make an opinion or to see things, again, perspective, that are beyond the actual slides. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I don't know where he's going with this.
Yeah.
Because I think
everything would have already been delivered in discovery.
And they would have had the full video. So I don't know what he's done except build up this expert's credibility, saying I bought your software, the police department bought your software.
We believe you.
Yeah, just
he just even said, if I'm not mistaken, and we can play this back again if we need to, but if I'm not mistaken, he just said, I just paid your renewal fees.
Yes, that's what I thought. So I don't know where he's going with that. I think, you got to be careful with experts, and you got to, like, a jury's going to say to themselves, wait a minute, this defendant's accused of shooting and killing a young man.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yes.
And the best his attorney could come up with on the expert who puts him there is, your family owns the company.
Yeah, so this expert has done really well with this apparatus that he's invented, and his family's done well, and he's been able to employ 10 employees. And by the way, I'm sorry, but this gentleman looks actually very nice and very respectable, and he's not touting himself. He's very low key about it. I don't know. I think you and I are in agreement, Mike.
I think so.
I think so. I think what do our viewers think? Weigh in on this one, guys. But weigh in while we go on break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Okay, when we last left, right before break, we had the video expert, the analyst on expert, who was analyzing that video, Mike, as you know, of that fateful night and that fateful scene when Officer Oliver shot to death the young man, Jordan Edwards, very, very sad, 15-year-old boy. And now, right now, we have on the stand a replay of the officer, former officer, testifying. Now, it's a big deal to put the defendant on the stand in any case. And here we have a former police officer on the stand testifying about, presumably, what he thought, what was going through his head that night, and why he actually pulled out his gun, his firearm, and shot that young man dead. Let's listen in. This is gripping stuff. To be continued. Let's keep going with the defendant, Roy Oliver, former police officer, on the stand in Texas. Let's listen. Well, the officer is trying to paint a picture of what was going on that night, where he was, what he was seeing and hearing, and Mike and I are still kind of perplexed. So let's keep listening to his story, of his perspective of what happened that night. Speaking of following his lead, the defense lawyer, in putting on his witness, the defendant, is leading his witness by asking him a question like, were you just pretty much following his lead when he's talking about his co-officer there in the car? And the reason he has to do that, of course, is he's trying to make sure that Officer Grouse, he's trying to paint Officer Grouse as really the one that was the leader that night, right? That his defendant, his client, the guy that's on trial for murder, is really just following the lead of the other officer. So he said, you were just following his lead. And by that leading question, the defendant, Officer Oliver, was able to say, yeah, I was just following his lead. I was just kind of going after him. So whatever he did, I was just sort of his support. He actually used the word his support. That was the word he used, support. So I was just following his lead. I was his support. Grouse was, that's the other officer. Grouse was upset. He used salty language. We can imagine what that was. And I had to support him, i.e. I ended up shooting the kid in support of Officer Grouse. Is that your take? Or do you have
that's my take of it. I just don't understand why he's going down that road, because we know, if you've been watching his trial all along, that Grouse testified for the state, saying he didn't feel like he was in danger. He never felt like he was in danger. So right away you have a credibility problem with the defendant, who is now really going in opposite of what else are you going to do
when you've got your defendant who's on trial for murder? He has to say something. He has to say something other than what Grouse said. Well, he has to come up against his.
He doesn't have to contradict them. Well, first of all, every defendant, when they take the stand, is under an obligation to tell the truth.
Okay, let's
start there.
Start there. I agree.
And number two is that when you're a criminal defense attorney and your defendant, your client, is a police officer, you've got an advantage of probably 100 steps up over everybody else, because most of the time your defendants never testified in court before. Here you've got a trained professional witness who's testified for the very state that's prosecuting him.
Right.
But he still has the advantage of knowing how to speak to a jury, which I don't know if he really studied a lot, because it was a little unusual. When you heard the first segment, when his attorney goes, "Can you tell it to the jury?"
Right.
He should know that already. But to contradict, he should be talking about what he saw, what he thought, and what he felt, and get away from Grouse, because Grouse is no longer
his buddy.
Is a contributor into this. He's saying something opposite. But that still doesn't mean that they can still show he acted in accordance with proper police procedure.
I know. Maybe they're going to get to that. I don't know. Let's take a break. We'll be right back. This is fascinating stuff. Stay with us.
Thank you.
Okay, we're traveling now back to Texas with more of Roy Oliver on the stand, the former police officer in Texas. More of him. Okay, he's finally turning his head to face the jury. Mike and I are talking about this as they're watching. He's like, you got to be turning his head to watch the jury, not the defense lawyer. Okay, let's listen in a little bit more, and then Mike and I'll be on the other side to talk about it. All right, we have the defendant, this former officer Oliver, on the stand, Mike, for now a long time. He's finally moving his head to face the jury. That's so important. And as we talked about, this is a defendant that should be versed in that. But in all of this, he's trying to tell the story about what happened that night and why he was right and legally allowed to take out that gun and shoot in defense of his officer, even though the officer said, I didn't need you to be protecting me. And he's telling the story, and he's talking about kids running and screaming, and that it wasn't really safe for him to be walking down the middle of the road, but that Grouse said, he followed the lead. Are you convinced yet? Are you convinced with what he's saying yet?
I'm a little troubled by this whole line of, this is his story.
Exactly.
And it seems more the focus is on his attorney telling the story.
Well, it's all leading questions.
And it's not him telling the story. I think if I was this attorney, I would move behind the jury so he's not playing like he's watching a ping pong match while he's trying to answer the jury.
Notice his head. Everybody notice his head.
And let the jury hear him say the words, not respond to things he should be saying, because what's important is what he saw that night. And I think they're losing something in the translation when his attorney's going through it. Quite frankly, as you and I discussed off camera or watching it, we couldn't believe that the prosecution's not objecting to these leading questions.
Almost every question, guys, listen to every question. Almost every question, if you write it down, just take out your little pad and pen. Almost every question is a leading question. Weren't you following in the lead? Didn't you see that? Wasn't it like this? Weren't there kids out there? Wasn't it a dark night? Simple things like that. The other side's letting them go. You don't hear any objections. But I'm not sure that it's that effective, because as Mike said, what's happening is, yes, you have the body of the officer. You have the officer sitting there and he's saying yes or no and answering little tidbits. But he's not telling the story. His face isn't looking at the jury, and the words that he's saying aren't coming out and telling his story. I don't know, guys. We'll have more later, though. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this quick break. Hi, I'm Lise Wiehl, back with Law and Crime. Very interesting afternoon with a case out in Texas. A case of the former officer, Texas versus Roy Oliver. Fascinating case. It happened in a fateful night in 2017 where Roy Oliver was in his car with another officer, Officer Grouse. And now this case has really pitted these two officers against each other. Roy Oliver is now on the stand, and we've been watching these replays of this testimony for the better part of this last hour, where Oliver is saying, look, I was really taking the lead of my other officer, Officer Grouse, who took out of the car before me after a shooter, he's saying, and it was a dark night, and I was following the lead of this other officer. By the way, the other officer, Officer Grouse, has already testified and said, I didn't need any help this night. I wasn't afraid for my life. There was no reason for Officer Oliver to be shooting anybody. So he's already testified to that. The bottom line is that a 15-year-old boy was shot that night by this officer that is now on trial for murder. And the issue is whether or not he really should have been, he had the right to shoot this boy. We're watching this testimony very carefully. Are you convinced? Are you convinced by his testimony? Are you convinced that his perception that his officer, the officer that he's supposed to be there and take care of and to protect, because that is true, was in jeopardy that night, and that he needed to pull out his firearm and shoot that 15-year-old dead? Are you convinced of that by his testimony? Think about that. Let's go to top crimes first, and then we'll go back to the case in Texas. Top crime. Okay, Mike, before we go to the officer Oliver case again, raise the age. What do you think of it? I mean, this is what we're talking about, this juvenile case again, where we've had these officers hurt. This is the second time now in the Bronx. In as much as 2 weeks, 20 people in one case, 18, 17 people in the other case. I hate to just beat this 2 times in 2 hours, but I have to. I mean, this is my precious 2 hours here at Law and Crime. I've just got to bring this up with you.
I'm not a big fan of raise the age, because I'm really persuaded after much research on my own that the psychologists are right, that the human mind doesn't mature until about 24 years of age. Mm-hmm. And the biggest problem, especially at 16 to 17 years old, is these children, and I consider them children.
They are children.
Have a very big problem with risk impulse control, and they're big risk takers.
Right.
From any walk of life. This is scientific data that's pretty much unshaken now as to the maturity of their minds. So if you notice, you don't see 16 and 17-year-olds getting convicted of crimes that take master planning. Right. You don't see them in big drug operations or quite frankly, or a sophisticated murder or assassination type thing. It's mostly all impulse control, things that happen in the street, things of those nature. So if we don't have a system of reform and it's just punishment, then we're going to have a problem, because we're thwarting that maturity from the time you incarcerate them from 16 to 17 if they're not going to get out till they're 30. I think we've lost precious time where we can better serve our purposes other than punishment.
Yeah, what I'm concerned about too is just that obviously it's not working. So whatever you think about this, on the issue of raise the age, what's happening after we do it and we say, okay, 16 and 17-year-olds have to be tried as adults, whatever happens at this point, it's not working in the prison system, because we can't have this where then they commit other crimes like we're just seeing on these videos, and that just gets then, they get into the system again, and people are getting hurt. People are getting hurt.
People are getting hurt, and we've got to think, the legislatures have to think laws out. They just can't say what's going to get them votes. Right. They've got to think about in the long run. You see, there's no simple answers for complex questions, and we need to answer these complex questions.
There never is, Mike. There never is. We've got to always think through the next step.
And I'm sure Oliver wishes he did.
Yeah, I'm sure he did. Great segue. And with that, let's go back to just swing back to Texas, shall we? Should we put on our magic wings and swing back to Texas to the Oliver case? Okay, so now we have Officer Grouse on the stand. Remember, Officer Grouse was the other officer in the car and at the scene with Officer Oliver. He's the one who's saying that he did not need protection that night. So let's listen in. Ooh, Mike. Okay, now, just everybody, of course, unless you tune in the last 2 seconds, you know that that is the officer that was with the Officer Oliver on, that's now on trial for murder. Mike, I mean, Officer Grouse is saying, I mean, point out he did not feel that he was in danger.
Devastating testimony.
Devastating.
For the defense. I agree with you. I also think this is a very good comparison we're seeing here.
Yes.
And you look at Grouse's testimony, and he actually is speaking about what we're saying that Oliver is doing. Everything wrong that Oliver did when he testified, Grouse is doing right. You don't even know, other than when there's breaks, that there's a lawyer questioning him.
Exactly.
And that sends a couple messages to a jury. Number one is it tells them that this witness was aware and conscious as things were going on. So he seemed, if he's recollecting like this, that jury is getting a sublime message that here's a guy who's in control. Mm-hmm. He's not looking for words. He remembers. He knew what he was doing, and that's why he didn't shoot.
He doesn't need to be fed the words. He's there. He's in control. Exactly.
Then you have someone there who's testifying when Oliver is. He's actually testifying in accordance of what they're accusing him with, not knowing what's going on, not knowing what happened, and his recollection is poor.
Well, let me tell you someone whose recollection is excellent, and that's our own Aaron Keller, who's going to have a daily debrief. There he is, looking all handsome. Look at that hair. Every day, 5 o'clock, he's going to have a half-hour show starting today, where he's going to debrief all the court cases that we've covered in the day, and it's going to be fabulous. I saw him earlier today. He's working on it. It's going to be terrific. So you got to tune in for that, and we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. I'm Lise Wiehl. I still am Lise Wiehl, and we're still on the Oliver case in Texas. It's fun being in New York, and then we go to Texas all at the same time. That's what we get to do here at Law&Crime. Sometimes we have 3 or 4 or 5 cases going on. Now we're going to go to the sibling of the victim in the case, and he was actually in the car with the victim in the case. So let's go and listen to his testimony. It's going to be hard, but let's listen into this.
Tell them the facts of this case. How do you know what you're going to tell that jury?
Because I was there.
And you saw what?
Yes, sir.
Is there any other document or video that you've seen that makes you know what you know?
No, sir.
Ask the witness, Judge.
Mr. Gill, you may proceed when ready.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Do you know the names of the 2 officers that were involved in the shooting out there that evening?
Yes, sir. Well, one, Roy Oliver.
Okay. What's the other one's name?
I don't know his name.
Have you been told his name?
Yes, sir.
You didn't know either of these individuals before all this happened, did you?
No, sir.
So somebody in law enforcement has told you who these people are, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, what else did they tell you?
Nothing.
Not a single other thing.
No, sir.
What day did you testify in front of the Dallas County Grand Jury?
Last year. And
If I said it was in July of 2017, does that sound about right?
yes, sir.
Before you testified in front of the Dallas County Grand Jury, how many times have you met with the people over here from the DA's office?
Probably like 3 times.
And how many times have you met with them since?
Probably like 7.
How many times have you met with them out at the corner of Barron and Shepherd?
3 times.
Were any of those, or how many of those were before you testified in front of the grand jury?
Can you repeat that?
How many times did you meet with them at the corner of Barron and Shepherd before you testified in front of the grand jury?
Once.
And how many times between the grand jury and today?
Once.
Nothing further.
Any other questions?
State judge.
Very good. Sir, if you could please stand down just very, very briefly. Exit the courtroom. Don't go very far. This will be just a second.
I think there was cross. Yeah. Yeah, that was direct examination. I don't think there was cross. He said, just stick around. Tough examination. I mean, you've got Mike, you've got the brother of the defendant who was sitting there in the car with him. You know, what did you make of that testimony?
Well, it's very powerful testimony.
It really
because
is.
The prosecutor now has, you know, they get 2 great points out. Is number one is that this was somebody's brother.
Exactly.
This was a family
Look at
member.
this kid, right?
And not only that, but he was a witness to the crime.
Right.
So
I
it was
was
very
there, he
effective,
says.
yeah. And I think what the prosecutor was trying to do there, asking about all those meetings,
I've been in the grand jury, you've been here, you've been there, testified all these times, right?
I think he was trying to bypass any cross-examination by the defense, trying to show that he's somebody who, you know, was somehow bent to give testimony their way. But any good attorney on either side worth their salt is going to prepare a witness. And I mean,
Yeah, of course.
the state should
Right.
make sure the witness they're
Right.
putting on is credible.
Right.
So I think that was a sad but very effective witness.
Right. And I think actually for the defense not to stand up and do a hard cross-examination makes sense.
Yeah, there's something that everybody thinks about is that you have to cross-examine every witness.
No, you don't.
That's for the less experienced.
Exactly.
Because if you're not going to move that witness, there's no point in letting the jury hear his testimony again.
Well, A, that's right, and B, especially with somebody who is a family member of a victim, I think our hearts just naturally go out to that person, and to have him on the stand any longer than he has to be, especially if you're going to be in a confrontational mode when this person didn't do anything, you know, that we know of.
And his testimony is really indisputable.
Right.
His brother's dead. His brother was shot.
Right.
The defense really doesn't go to those 2 aspects of this case. It's what was Oliver thinking?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let us move this case forward, and we're going to go to another witness. This is Jeremy Seaton, who actually saw the initial shots. Now, this is before, not the shots of the deceased, but the initial shots that actually started this whole thing rolling, okay? So let's back it up a little bit before the actual incident, and let's go to Jeremy and see what he has to say. Okay, so Jeremy's setting the scene. Tupac, Mike, is part of all of this. And so they're setting a scene. There was something going on. There were shots. There were things happening. There was a big, you know, a ruckus and salty language again. We had the salty language thing again.
Must be a Texas term.
I know salty. I've heard salty language, and I'm from the West Coast.
Well, I never heard salty language. I use it, but
you use salty language.
So I've just learned.
Yes, so you've learned. Yes, so you use salty language, and it's salty language. Yes, but I think this helps the prosecution. Well, of course it does, because it's the prosecution's case, in the sense that, yes, these things transpired, but spatially, time-quentially, is that a good word, time-quentially?
Chronologically?
Yeah, chronologically, there you go. They happened well before we have the arrival of the officers.
It's interesting, because what this did was, it brought out something to me as I was listening to it, is he was at the party, and so was the brother. They were leaving the party. A lot was made about this party.
Right.
But the shots being fired had nothing to do with this party. And the interesting thing is, if you look at both these gentlemen, the brother and this other young man, is they come across as very credible, very neat, very presentable, very articulate.
Right.
They don't seem to fit the kind of kids that would be at a party that, if you were a police officer and aware of what was going on, they don't seem to fit that rowdy mode. And it sort of fits into Grouse's description that the shots had nothing to do with the party and was somewhere away.
Well, yeah, but okay. But, you know, it's different at night. I don't know, whatever. But I think spatially, I'm going with the spatial argument here. But now I got to go with the spatial argument for a break. Let's go to the... Well, when you testify in your own defense, you can open up the proverbial can of worms. And it seems that the defendant, Oliver, did just exactly that. And now we have two rebuttal witnesses because apparently the officer said a couple of things that allowed enough so that the rebuttal witnesses can testify. And we have one, Ms. Monique here, is going to testify about a car accident that she and another person were in, where the defendant was in plain clothes, and we'll see what happened and how he reacted in that car accident. She bumps another car, and this man she identifies as tall and bald and wears sunglasses, but she can't identify him further, approaches her with a gun, points a gun in her face, and asks for all her papers, but she won't give him. She shields her sister. Look, let's listen to the other passenger in the car, and then we'll come back and talk about it on the other side. Okay. Let's get to the legal analysis part of this. Mike, that's why you're here. One of the reasons, other than I get to spend a lovely afternoon talking with you. Why did the judge allow this testimony in, these two rebuttal witnesses? This has nothing to do with the actual night this poor boy was killed. Why is this a testimony in?
Well, my understanding was originally they tried to get it in, the state tried to get it in the direct case under what we call Federal Rule of Evidence 404B, which is pretty much to all the states.
Right.
And that's a prior bad act that's used to show identity, intent, someone acting in conformity. It's a probative, whether it has probative value or prejudicial value. That's the balance. And a lot of judges don't like to use it because it really is unfair to the defendant in the sense that it happened at another time. And unless it's something that's really necessary to prove one of those missing elements, mistake, or something of that nature, they don't like it to let it in. When a defense wins that motion, we consider that a good day. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, when Oliver took the stand, he testified that a way he acts, that he acts carefully, things of that nature, and that what he did that was he opened the door. And that means now, because of credibility, we could prove, no, you don't always act that way. You brought it up that you always act that way, and we're going to show another time you didn't act that way.
Right.
And when that door gets opened, the state will usually kick it down. And this is testimony that, in my opinion, is devastating.
Absolutely devastating. Those two women they have nothing to gain. They have nothing, you know, they weren't even in there in that incident. When they testified, and when the first Monique testified about how she held her papers in such a way that if she were to be shot, she would be shot to protect her sister. I don't know about you, Mike. I almost lost it right here on my computer.
Well, it seemed very heartfelt, especially if you noticed she was pretty sterile about what happened up to the accident until they mentioned about that gun being in her face. And you could see her getting visibly shaken.
Of course.
And you could also see tears rolling down her eyes.
And that is absolutely real. And I think she's probably still in fear, even as she testified there, even though she couldn't actually identify the defendant there in the stand as she sat there because he had sunglasses on that dark night. We'll be right back after this break. Okay, now we're flying straight back to Texas with the Oliver case, and we're going to the prosecution closing. Listen up. All right, now you've heard from both sides. Now the moment you've all been waiting for, the verdict in the Officer Ray Oliver case. Here it is. Okay, verdict's in. What do you think?
Well, I think that was a a good verdict. I think the jury listened to the case. I think the prosecution presented a very coherent, chronological case that the jury could understand, and a case that the jury would have found beyond the reasonable doubt as to his guilt. I think the biggest problem was, beside all they did, was the prior bad act. I think that really showed that when you saw how he acted to these defenseless young women in a car, that you could see that regardless of what happened to Officer Grouse, who testified he wasn't ever threatened,
right,
that even though it was in Texas, and I'm not trying to be funny, but this was sort of your rogue cowboy kind of police officer who did as he saw fit and disregarded training, and I think that came through in the facts as they were presented in his case.
Well, in those two rebuttal witnesses, which we just heard the very last part of in the last couple of minutes here, paint that scene. They're driving this car. They have a fender bender, and that's what it was, a fender bender. And he's plain clothes. He's not an officer. He's wearing sunglasses. And he comes up to this poor young woman, and he takes out a firearm, shoves that firearm basically in her face when she's there with her sister, and puts that firearm in her face and asks for her papers. Doesn't, as the other one testifies, doesn't ask how they're doing, anything like that. Whoa, that jury's got to be convinced, like, he does that, and there's nothing going on. There's no shooting going on as there was in the other. There's nothing. There's no officer that's in danger. There's two young women in a fender bender, and he brings out a firearm.
And they even showed, one of the questions the prosecution asked were, you weren't rustling for papers or anything, so there was no furtive movements or anything to even raise a suspicion. So I think that was very devastating, and I think they really needed to think a little more clearly about opening the door like they did when he testified. And we sort of talked about how it didn't seem like he was that prepared to testify for such an important event.
Yeah, well, and what's crazy about that is he was led through his testimony, right? So you would think that as poorly as that was, he was actually led through his testimony. So if he's going to be led, he should have been led better.
Well, it's always difficult because
I know.
That's why they call them trials. You never know what's going to happen when somebody
Monday
takes
morning quarterbacking or Tuesday morning.
Very easy to sit here and do that.
Mike Koribanics, I got it right again, I hope. Criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Lise Wiehl for Law&Crime signing out. Stay tuned for the daily debrief with Aaron Keller. It's going to be great. Stay with us. Till next time.